Welcome back to Narrowing the Divide. And this week's guest is none other than the Sha Sparks. Shay, say hello.
Hello. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Hey, I'm really glad that you're here as well. I think we're going to have a great conversation. We've got a couple topics in mind. But before we jump into that, I just want to give people a little idea who you are. I'll start, and if you'll follow up with anything you'd like to share about your journey along the way, that would be wonderful. But Shay is, first of all, probably first and foremost, has been a friend of mine for several years now. And I have the pleasure of brainstorming with her on a fairly consistent basis. We recorded a podcast back in March of 21. It was the first time we really started getting to know each other, at least at the professional capacity. Now that she lives near me, we get to hang out occasionally too. So that's pretty cool. But if you want to hear our previous conversation, it's Transforming Trauma into Treasure, episode number 27 of the Pro Growth podcast, which is my former podcast. So Shay is a fellow coach, master NLP practitioner. Wow, I have to learn words to speak on a podcast. It's tough. She's a certified fearless living coach, and she is a wealth of information when it comes to podcasting. She's been doing it much longer than I. Shay, thank you again for being here.
Thank you. It's funny when you think about time. Like, God, it's been that many years, and then you're like, it hasn't been that long. But so much fun and goodness has happened in the meantime.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's been a lot of fun. So share a little bit about your background and kind of what led you to. So you've been running your podcast, I think, what, 5 years?
Yeah, 5.5 years.
5.5 years. And so I'm curious, what inspired you to pursue that journey? What inspired you to become a coach?
Mm. Well, I'm sure you do not have enough time on your show for me to explain all of it. So the quick-ish versions is once upon a time I dated a guy who actually had a podcast. I thought it was very fascinating. Him and his buddies sat around his kitchen table and talked about movies, and I thought that was really awful. And so I loved the concept of the
You
podcast,
wanted to do it.
but I thought his subject was just why? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
But the podcasting medium was like, well, that's really fascinating. And so I actually, at the time where I was living, had a community college that had a intro to podcasting class. And so I took it just for funsies and it was like, well, this is really fascinating. I joined a local meetup that did podcasting, and I asked a million questions to the the host of the meeting, and of course he was like, we could talk about this another time. And I quickly learned that he was not the person I wanted to talk to. And so I decided, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? So just start. And I took something called the Alt NBA with Seth Godin many years ago, and his whole thing was ship it, just ship it.
Mhm.
And it was around actually about a year after I took that I started the podcast and was like, why not just ship it? So I had tons of entrepreneur friends, and I still do, that were like, had all this like stuff that they went through that they never talk about, and kind of the muck and the yuck that kind of like propelled them into their next thing. And I was like, I want to talk about that. Like, I want to talk about that muck and yuck and the kind of the stuff that we go through that no one wants to hear. But there's so much lessons that we learn in that. And so I started with my cell phone, having them on speakerphone, recording on Audacity on my laptop in my closet. So I could have
Nice.
the soundproof. And I was standing there, like I didn't have a desk or a seat or anything. I was just standing there. And
Hmm.
the content of every conversation was brilliant, was gold. Like just the things we talked about, the deep dives that we went into. It was really beautiful, right? A beautiful experience and horrible, horrible sound.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great lead in because, and I didn't even mention. So first of all, your show is called the Sha Sparks Show,
Yes.
your podcast,
Yes.
and
Now
you,
it is
I
called that
know,
now. Yes.
yes, and I know you work on a couple other projects as well. But the topics that we decided we were going to kind of talk about will lead into with what you've just shared because coaching and getting started is kind of where we had
Mm,
agreed to go into this conversation. And I found a couple other things really interesting. So ship it, right?
yeah.
There's a lot to be said about doing it gritty, doing it dirty, whatever people like to use as a phrase, but shipping it is the key, right?
Yeah.
You can learn a lot. You can spend a lot of time learning and never taking action.
Mm,
And it's never going to be perfect, especially if it's your own voice.
mm,
You're going to keep listening to it and going, oh man, I, and there's always opportunities to improve. But we went to Podfest earlier this year, and there was a
mm,
young lady there who had been wanting to start a podcast, dreaming of starting a podcast for nearly 4 years, if I recall her story correctly. And she launched her podcast live at Podfest, which was super neat and super fun
yeah.
to be a part of. But what if she'd done it 4 years ago, right? Where would
Right.
she be today? She'd be so much better. On the topic of coaching, though, yeah, what that leads us right in because there's a lot of coaches out there who have gone through something and they too just decide to throw the label on themselves, if you will. Label's probably a terrible word, but they like to call themselves a coach with no training, formal or otherwise, no certifications. They just kind of jump in. We've just established that there may be some value in that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love this conversation because it's near and dear to my heart because that's kind of how I started.
Mm,
I went through a traumatic, abusive relationship, got out of it, started to heal myself, started to learn so many things about myself, had amazing support community around me that was like, have you considered becoming a life coach? And I went to the interweb and was like, okay, Google, tell me all the best coaching certifications in the world, right? And
yes.
I found a whole lot of hooey out there at this time, right? There's a whole lot more now. But at this
Yes.
point in my life, which was, gosh, how many years ago was that? 6, 7 years ago. And it was like, uh, I mean, okay. So I would look into them, I would research, I would talk to people who did it, talk to people who was, the salesperson of it. And it was like,
Hmm.
that doesn't feel right. So you mean to tell me like I go to LA for a weekend and I walk out as a quote unquote certified coach? Okay. That doesn't feel right. And so I then came across this man who said, I can help you build your coaching practice through your own what did he call it? It's an acronym for something and I cannot remember it now, but pretty much your own DNA, right? And
Okay.
DNA stood for something. And I was like, okay, awesome. Yeah, let's do it. And he's like, okay, so what have you gone through? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. And then he said, I spent way too much money with him and way too much time. And after about, I would say close to a year, he's like, okay, now you need to go write your website on what you want your coaching to be. And I was like, isn't that why I hired you? I mean, why are you making me do this? And it just is so by happenstance, right? Like everything happens for a reason, they say. I decided to go to this one particular coaching. I won't say who, and a recommendation of a friend. And I looked into that and I was like, ooh, I could. It was in many places, but it was not in the city I lived. So I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, let me go somewhere where I haven't been. And on there, it was Nashville. And I'm like, you know what? I've never been to Nashville. I don't like cowboys. I don't like country music. So I should probably go there. And so
Oh dear.
I was a practitioner stepping out of my comfort zone on a regular basis. So I thought, why not go to Nashville? Let me experience that. And then something said, nope, that is not the right thing to do. So I
Mm.
still had the time off that particular weekend, several months later off, and I was still thinking Nashville. So I went to Facebook and typed in Facebook what conferences, what events were going on in Nashville that particular weekend. And I came across Storybrand, which we both know and have bonded over. And the
Yes.
conference was called Clarify Your Website. I mean, could it be any more perfect, right?
Yeah. Huh.
And on the first, so I go buy my ticket. I'm like, I'm there. I loved Nashville. Started listening to country music right before then. And my goal was, Googled like what else is going on. And my goal was, you know what? I'm going to go to Country Music Awards while I'm here. Why not? But
Hey.
that's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But while I was there, the first person, I won't say first person, the first day, there was a person that caught my attention off to the side, and she looked familiar, and I loved her outfit, but I didn't get a chance to talk to her. Second day, I still didn't get to talk to her. But after the first or the second day, we had went out to dinner as a group, some people, and I'm like, I don't know about you all, but I'm stuck. Like, I don't know what to do next. And tomorrow's our last day, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to walk away from anything. And they said, oh, you should talk to the other coach in the room. And I go, the other coach? I didn't realize there was another coach. They're like, yeah, her name's Rhonda Britton. I went, Rhonda Britton. Why do I know that name? Oh, she was on Oprah. She had her own TV show called Starting Over. I went, oh, she was like the first life coach on the scene. Oh, got like in the 90s. And I'm like, okay, got it. So I started talking to her the next day. We had lunch. She said, who do you have your certification through? And I said, oh, I'm not certified. And she said,
Mm.
oh. And I said, do you think I should be certified? And she goes, well, yes, of course. I have
Mm.
my own certification program. I said, you do? What is it called? Because I never found it. I never found it when I was researching it.
Yeah.
And so she's like, it's the Fearless Living Institute. I said, what is that about? She said, I help people step out of their comfort zone. Didn't I just say I was doing that? Okay. This is in alignment. All right. So what's next? And she goes, well, if you're really interested, I'm having a workshop on fearless conversations. And this was in November. So in January of the next year out in LA. And I'm like, huh. Well, considering this clarify your message for your website has made me narrow down that I am a communication coach. So Fearless Conversations is also in alignment. So why not
Mm.
go? So I bought my ticket and I go, and I'm now sitting in the Fearless Conversations workshop. And the first 3 hours, I'm like, wow, I'm sitting here in a room full of coaches or people getting coached, and I feel like I'm sitting in a hug. And I thought, I don't know what this is, but I need more of it. And so I went to the back and I'm like, how do I sign up for this? What is this like? What does this entail? And that's how I got certified.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, so you've brought up some good points, and I want to touch on a couple, because we also had this particular conversation of certification versus training.
Mm,
And I've attended several certifications, but what I have not done is the nationally recognized internationally, recognized
yeah.
certification. I'm not an ICF coach.
And neither am
Um,
I.
a- and I believe that there's value in all of what we've said so far. I think there's value in attending certification training of some sort, whether it's ICF accredited or not. I don't I'm going to share something about ICF in a minute. I think I shared it with you a couple of weeks back, but there's also value in starting where you are. I would never suggest a coach just say, you know what, I've been through some things. I'm just going to go start coaching people,
Right.
because there's some methodologies and some approaches that can be used to help you become a better coach. Now, that said, the process is ever evolving. In fact, I just got an email. This is so funny that we're talking about this right now. I got an email today from Steve Chandler. Steve Chandler, for those that don't know, is the co-author with Rich Litvin to The Prosperous Coach. And so I'm
Mm,
on his email list. They have I think it's Coaching Prosperity School is the name of their school. I
Mm.
have not attended, but I do get content from Steve, which is wonderful. And today he had an email that sort of centers on what we're talking about, is that start with what you have and continue to progress and get better
Mm.
over time. Each time you coach someone, each time you learn something new and you implement it, you're going to become a better coach.
Mm.
I've been coaching now for, gosh, technically as a certified coach with 48 days and as a certified life coach with Transformation Academy and some other trainings I've attended. But if I count, that's probably 3 years. But if I count StoryBrand, where
Mhm.
ultimately I was consulting and coaching people in that aspect. And then before that, in the military as a master resilience trainer, I've been coaching for quite a few years.
Yeah.
I just didn't always realize that that's what it was called, or that's what I was doing, or that I could actually get paid to do it.
Right. Right.
But so there's tremendous value in at least finding a training that resonates with something you want to
Mm.
learn, learn to improve, and learn to apply within yourself. I don't I personally don't support pursuing ICF accreditation or credentialing simply for the purpose of getting a certification.
Mm.
I was in a, I don't know if I'm still allowed in there. I was in a
Not after
forum,
this. No.
probably not. I was in a forum recently, and there was a experienced coach, certified coach, who
Mm.
had someone in their purview who wanted some coaching but couldn't afford his services. He suggested that a new coach who is still pursuing certification consider taking them on at low or no cost to help them. And that really did not sit well with me. I was like, if that's what we're teaching in an internationally recognized certification program, that you don't present or bring value to the work that you're doing until you've completed their certification, I don't agree at all.
Mm.
I think that's very misleading, actually. I think
Mm.
that leads people to believe that that's the only way to achieve value in what they're doing. Forget about all of the life experience, all of the formal and informal education throughout their careers or their journey. It's until you're certified, you don't deserve to charge what I charge. So you should take this client on, is how I've read it. And it was
Mm.
terrible.
Mm. Okay.
When I look at my next trainings that I want to participate in, I look for those things. What are we teaching? I get that they all teach a very similar business model as far as, you've got to have X, Y, and Z on your website. You've got to have all these key things. They don't really teach people the business of coaching, though. They
Mm.
just kind of go with what the marketing world says is true. I don't agree with most of that either. So there you go.
Well, and that's why you have this podcast, right? Is to kind of put the other side on that out there.
Yeah, well, and have these conversations, right? I
Right.
think there's value in just knowing that it's okay to sort of fumble your way through, that it's not a requirement to go out and become an ICF coach, but
Mm.
there is tremendous value in going and getting training that makes sense to you. Certification aside, it doesn't have to be a certification that you achieve at the end of your training either. Most of them give you a certification. I don't think it's a requirement. It's just saying that, yes, you've gone through that process and you have embraced their methodology and their thought processes behind what it is you're coaching on.
Yes, and so
Yeah.
I love your point, and I'll share mine.
Yes.
I'm like you. Like we did professional prior to being called a coach, right? We did professional careers. I was a
Mm.
hairstylist, so of course I was coaching behind the chair, right? My entire career.
Is that what you
And
do as a hairstylist?
is what?
Is that what you do? And I look at my hair, right? I don't go to hairstylists. So, and if
Right.
you can't see me because I'm not using all of this video, I have short hair. I was in the military for way too long.
S-
I've never been coached by a barber.
Got it. So hairstylists are different than barbers. Hairstylists are with their clients probably a lot longer than barbers.
Mm,
So hairstylists are most of the time like bartenders, right? People tell every bartender or hairstylist everything. And believe me,
everything.
my clients told me their fair share of things I did not want to know, but they told me anyway. And I think there's there's so much what you just said. So I'm trying to figure out what way to talk about it. So for me, I knew again, my support system was like, okay, you should start a podcast, you should become a coach, you should write a book, motivational speaker. And I didn't have the confidence in myself to think I
Mm,
could do it. I thought, I don't think I can do that. I want to do that, but I don't think I could. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, what if I borrow their confidence in me
mm,
and just pursued what that would look like, hence finding ways to learn how to coach, a methodology, a formula, some sort of framework, right?
yeah.
And the worst case scenario is I still can do hair. I learn a new skill. Perfect, right? And so it never crossed my mind to actually like continue this as a career. It was just learning a new skill and see what happens.
Mm,
And the way that I believe is if someone that is reaching out for coaching, like, hey, I want to work with you and I don't have the funds. So if you, as the coach, know that that this would be an ideal slash client, if this is someone that you have the automatic a heart, quote unquote, a heart for, your
yeah.
energy is pulled to them, like you're like, I know I can help them, then I think it is our spiritual duty slash obligation to help in some way, shape, or form. With it could be a 15-minute session, it could be with a session for a testimony. It could be there's bartering,
Hmm.
there's all kinds of things. I mean, I'm bartering with somebody right now for coaching. There's so many different ways that we could add value
Hmm.
with actual dollars and cents, not exchanging hands. And I'm going to put a caveat here and several things. One's coming up for me is Bob Berg's The Go Giver book
Hmm.
about the law of reciprocity. So I know, so in my training program, the certification was like cosmetology school. You had to have so many hours of practical
Yeah.
coaching before you could quote unquote graduate, right? Same thing with my coaching. So I had to coach 75 hours before I could graduate.
I
And
had to do that
so
with 48 days as well.
and I think that is the practical side that I think so many coaching certifications, quote unquote, are
Hmm.
missing. It's that practicality, it's that taking that action because you can learn it, but can you do it and implement it is a whole nother thing. Then on the other side of that is the business side of it. Well,
Hmm.
let's start you out. And what they did is cosmetology school prices, right? $4 for a haircut. So it was $25 for coaching. So I think they did a disservice to the coaches coming up as charging that little. Now, mind you, I get that some people had never owned a business before and they were like, yes, absolutely, let's start at 25. But then
Hmm.
really ingrain in them that their value and their worth is
Far.
not $25.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said about that. And I agree with you, by the way. I think that they have not done themselves justice in structuring a program that suggests they start out with a fee like that. But on the flip side, there's programs telling people that they should start out, $5, 10, 15, $25,000, $100,000. And I think there's some lessons to be gleaned from those people who
Mm,
have done that. For instance, Rich Litvin charges $100,000 for one-on-one coaching.
mhm,
I think he probably commands it, and that's fine. What I know to be true, though, is he didn't start there either. He'll tell you publicly, and if you go on his LinkedIn page right now, I think he said it recently. He started out making $10 a month with his
mm,
first coaching client years ago. So there's a confidence problem that has to be addressed in
mhm.
many cases.
Yeah.
And I think what these programs have done who require some coaching hours is help people navigate the initial, how do I get the confidence? Because we
Mhm,
think that confidence is some sort of requirement to start. And what we're teaching is that it's more of a result. And the more you coach, the more results you start to see,
mhm,
the more tweaks you recognize you want to make in how you're coaching, the more you probably want to learn. I know for me, it's true. The more I want to learn, the more I coach, the more I'm like, oh, I wasn't sure about this scenario. I'm going to go research it. I'm going to go
mhm,
read a book. I'm going to go find an answer so that if it comes up again, I'm better able to navigate those things. I, there's tremendous value in the ongoing personal and professional growth that
mhm,
takes place, but they're just there from that perspective. Those programs that do offer that are there to set the groundwork for you. And hopefully you're pursuing enough of your own growth to start to develop beyond that.
mm.
I know that's true for me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think my 2 cents on this is personal growth is professional growth. Professional growth is personal growth. I think they go hand in hand, number
Absolutely.
one. Number two, I think it's so when I took Fearless Conversations workshop, it was
Hmm.
a 3-day event. And I loved what she said that was missing from all of the other modalities, all the other framework that I had been looking into before hers, was take this framework and what you learn here in this workshop and apply it to your own way of coaching.
Yeah.
And and then so it was like, yes, that's exactly what I want. There's so many coaches out there who could take a certification weekend and they're certified under a certain person's name. And I'm not going to name
Hmm.
names, but I'm sure you guys will find them if you're looking for them. And then they become another seller of that person's information, like
Yeah.
proprietary intellectual
Yeah.
property, right? Their next book, their next workshop. And that's fine if that's how you want to start. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great groundwork. I think it's great, foundation if that's how you want to build. But I suggest to not stay there, right?
Hmm.
And the thing I love about what Rhonda says in everything that she does is if I'm a coach and I'm going to tell you what to do, then I'm dirty coaching you. I'm a consultant. I'm not
Hmm.
a coach. Your opinion is a consultant. Coaching is asking you the right question to empower the client to get the answer that empowers them to take the action.
Absolutely. I agree with you. In fact, I in my own coaching usually will, ask the questions that I hear I should be asking based on what's being said or what comes up in a conversation or what's presented at the onset of a session. And I usually will say, hey, right now I'm going to offer an opinion or some advice, which sort of puts me in the consulting or advising role. And I just want to acknowledge that that's the intent here. The Coaching Habit is another great book.
Mm.
Um, Author's name eludes me right off the top of my head, but I'll make sure to put a link in. Anyway, they talk about that in the book, or he talks about that in the book. It's, you know, don't disguise advice with a question.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's so good as a coach. Don't
Right.
disguise advice as a question, because a lot of coaches will do that. They'll say, well, have you thought about X?
Mm.
And now you're leading them. And that's moving into consulting and or advising, and not coaching. I 100% agree with that
Yeah.
assessment or statement.
I try to ask, may I suggest something?
Yeah. Hey, I'm gonna
Yeah.
let me shift into the consultant's role for a second and
Mhm.
say, yeah, may I offer some suggestions or
Mhm.
advice? Because I always ask for permission. That's something that I have certainly learned, because I used to be one of those guys. I just throw out advice, and people get tired of that.
Well, and truth be told, I thought that's what it was, right? Before
Yeah.
I went down the route of really looking into it, I thought, well, I want to be a coach. I give advice all day long from behind the chair. Let me keep doing that, right? But what the funny thing was is that when I learned what not to do, I started to notice that my clients were my hair clients, let me clarify, were actually asking for my advice. And when they
Mm-hmm.
didn't, I would say, "Are you asking for my advice?" And they're like, "Absolutely, I'm asking for your advice." And I was like, "Wow, I didn't realize how much they thought of me all
Mm-hmm.
those years to really like think I had an answer or something." So I thought that was really profound just to learn that again, that confidence building about myself.
Absolutely. Well, let's. I think that's a good moving on point. Unless you wanted to add any other comments to
Mm,
that, because we also wanted to shift more into. We've already talked about some growth, right? Growth in the process of learning coaching, growth in the process of coaching people, and it's a constantly evolving process. What other tools or resources have you used or invested in for your own growth, personal, professional combined, in your words?
Ah, gosh. What other tools have I invested in? Ah, communities,
Yes.
masterminds, um, investing in finding, I won't say finding, I'll say being intentional in seeking out friend groups and conversations and community that are supportive, will say, hey, let's look at the other side of this, that are growing as well.
Hmm.
And I'll add their readers.
Lifelong learners is what I use.
Yeah. Yeah.
Avid, avid readers, probably.
Hmm.
At least well, I'll be honest about that. I love to read, and I don't read much fiction. Occasionally, I'll pick up a fiction book just to kind of jar the creativity or just take me away from everything else for a bit, and I'll read something different. But typically I pick up, the developmental books of some sort, coaching related, psychology related, business related, marketing. I've been through a ton of those. I continue to go through a ton of them, but sometimes I take several weeks away from reading anything, and then I'll go back to it. But no, there's tremendous value in that. I love community. I may have said this to you before in conversation, but I believe that connection and relationships, being community,
Hmm.
are really the currency of the future. And if you think
Hmm.
about that, I had a thought about that just this morning, actually. That hadn't really occurred to me. I've said that before. I believe that relationships are extremely valuable for my own growth, for the growth of those around me together. And I think there's some natural transition that occurs. You move on from relationships that are no longer serving you or each other. And it's natural to grow beyond that if people aren't keeping up with the pace of the group, so to speak. But I recognize that those relationships, those connections, that community might be where your income starts coming from as well. Now, I'm not going to suggest that anybody start pursuing their friends to pay them for coaching. But the idea of those relationships lead to other relationships, lead to other relationships, which leads to potential for more and more clients.
It's the well, I was going to say the law of reciprocity again, but that is not it. And it was on the tip of my tongue right before you said it, and then it was like, oh, now it's gone.
Welcome to Shay's
Oh,
world.
welcome to my world. Yeah, exactly. No. Your that phrase that goes into your net worth is your
Yeah.
network. Your network is your net worth.
Yes.
And people are like, "Oh, that's so cliche." But if you're it goes back to I think it was Jim Rohn who said you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
So
And if
true.
you are sitting, in your space wherever you are and you're looking at the 5 people that you call the most or that you talk to the most and you're leaning on them for guidance or support or whatever that looks like and they're not growing
Mm.
or they're not in your industry or your field and yet you're leaning on them as a mentor when they're not mentor material, how do you shift that? How do you get out of that mindset of leaning on them and being intentional and directional to find someone that would take you and where you want to go to the next level?
Well, there is the value of one-on-one coaching, and there's tremendous value from that perspective from finding the right mastermind that
Mm,
you just mentioned, right?
yeah.
Because I believe, and you can share your thoughts, of course, but I believe that a mastermind is a group of, for me, it's a small group. I'd say less than 10 for me, of people who are there 100% in support of each and every other person in that group. They're all committed to the success of every single one of the members of that group. That is the foundations of a great mastermind as it was written by Napoleon Hill,
Hmm.
in my belief.
Yeah.
Care to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm 100% agree with you. I think it's really goes back into what we've been talking about is this growth minded community where
Mm.
you're able to lean on each other. And if one person is taking a step up, more than likely, if they're in a committed to the growth of the group, then they're having a hand up, not a hand out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be lifting the next person. And then before you know it, everyone's going to be having that handout and you're all going to be in that upward trajectory rather than, sitting in the complaining process that so many people in the world get into. And that's why I have been in multiple masterminds, really communities, masterminds, whatever they want to call it, growth groups, even
Right.
Bible studies, right? Even, a family. You kind of could create a family in these groups is to really be able to propel your thinking and then someone to kick you in the pants and put you into action to get
Yeah,
you
the
to the
idea
next
is that
step.
they're able to challenge. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's all good.
Go ahead.
No, I finished.
Yeah. Okay. The idea is to be able to challenge each other, right?
Mm,
And you said something interesting because I'll share my experience of Bible studies or um, Sunday school, if you will, from my younger years. Is I didn't enjoy it because my parents didn't invest a lot of time in me learning
mm,
those types of things. And so if I showed up to Sunday school and we were doing Bible study, I just felt extremely lost and I wasn't a good fit for where the group was, and the group wasn't a good fit for where I was.
mm,
I think there's tremendous value in recognizing that lesson as it comes to leading masterminds. I've participated in some great masterminds, and what I found is you can't have people at different stages of life in the same mastermind together, or it is not as effective. Now,
Hmm.
that doesn't apply to group coaching. It doesn't apply to communities, because in communities in particular, there will be, by design, people from different stages. You've got people who can lead others. You've got people who are, seeking that knowledge from others. That's great. For me, a mastermind which is well put together, everyone is in a similar, maybe not the same, place in their journey, which is, so I'm not going to beat around the bush here. We also wanted to talk about masterminds because both Shay and I have masterminds that we are putting out into the world, inviting people to. At least I'm inviting. Most of mine's usually personal. So this podcast is personal. But I have an application process. That's neither here nor there. My ideal member from the mastermind, which I am facilitating, is new or early stage entrepreneurs who have left maybe corporate or the military for that matter, and they've moved into full-time self-employment, and they're looking for like-minded people, or those that are right there about to take that step and looking for the right level of support. I think that that's very similar. There's those that have just started and they can feed off of each other with the lessons. They're not too far behind and not too far ahead. As long as their commitment is over the next 6 to 12 months, that is in their plan to make that shift. And if it's beyond that, that might be a little too far out. But, that's just one of the keys that is in place for what I'm looking for my mastermind. And if you want more information on that, feel free to email me, dan@danw.us, because I have not even put a sales page up at the moment. In fact, I just had it edited, so it will be coming up soon. But Shay, tell us about your mastermind because it's slightly different.
Yeah. And, it's funny when speaking of entrepreneur and creating things, let me just speak to that for just a quick second.
Yeah.
You said you didn't have a sales page, and there's something about just the shipping it, right? You're just putting it out there already because you're already doing it, right? We
I
do
already have
this.
one member.
We already do this all the time, which is so funny. We don't even realize that this is what we've been doing because it's so natural. So I love that you're just using your email. So I don't have a sales page for mine either yet, but that was my goal this weekend, is to work on it. And yeah, they can email me. So when I heard your email, I'm like, oh, brilliant. Yeah. So my mastermind is around podcasters. I've been in the podcasting world for 5.5 years. I've had my signature show, which is called the Sha Sparks Show. Say all of that 100 times. Yeah. But it used to be called The Power of Investing in People. And I've had 4 other shows over the course of those 5.5 years. And as well as named the unofficial mayor of podcasting at Podcast Movement and Podfest conferences. So I'm saying all that because I have been asked over and over and over again, how do you start a podcast? Now that I've started, what do I do? So my vision is to really help and guide newbie and wannabe podcasters who have under 100 shows, who want to grow, who are going, I've made 20 shows and I'm not making $1 million yet. And I don't have 100,000 downloads yet. Like, I don't understand. Why am I not there? And it's like, oh, this is a marathon. How can we support each other? How can we cheer each other on to get you through that marathon? And best practices and AI and all the different, there's so much technology and it's constantly changing. And the best thing about being in community and connecting with like-minded people is all the people that I am personally connected with and in this world. And we'll have guest experts come in and share not just their expertise, but share their opinion. We'll have, people in the hot seats, which I think will be really fun. And, my whole goal is to really, it's to be a growth group. We call it a mastermind, but it's a growth group. And not just in your podcast, but in life, because that's, as we just said, your professional is going to lean into your personal, and your personal is going to
Yeah.
lean into your professional.
Especially if you're an entrepreneur. Now that
Yeah.
may be
Yeah.
different. I think if you're, in the corporate world, you want to separate a little bit of personal time and personal life and growth in that area from your growth in the corporate world. But as an
Right.
entrepreneur, it's blended, and you know, you might consider separating, dedicating time to family and that kind of growth separately. Yes. But when it comes to development, especially for coaches, it's 100% true. It's professional leads into personal. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
So where do you want people to get information about your mastermind for podcasters?
Yes. Thank you. So you can email me at hey Shay, that's SHA at shaysparks.com. SHASPARKS.com. You can also go to my website and just to kind of poke around and see more. But I'm on every social media, and almost known to man, but LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, The Shay Sparks. And my podcast is theshaysparkshow.com. You can even leave me a voice message there if you so desire. And yeah, I would love to hear from you, connect with you, get you in around other like-minded people to grow together. I just really believe that when we are lit up by ourselves, we have a tendency to fizzle out.
Hmm.
But when we are lit up and we light another match, we grow like wildfire. So I'm excited for this growth group.
I'm excited for you as well. I know that you've been working on it for a little while now, and so to put it out there like that, I well, I appreciate it. So I love seeing things like that come to fruition. And there you go. I we've sort of have touched on challenges
Mm,
along the way when we talk about the growth and the different lessons that have been learned as we're sharing about, growing as coaches. Podcasting is the next piece. I want to touch on something in podcasting because here's something I've learned. Love to hear maybe one of your most valuable lessons. But I think for me, the most valuable lesson I've learned over the last 6 or 7 years as an entrepreneur in general, and more recently applies to this podcast in particular, that's been what I'm focused on. So the first thing that came to mind is you were just talking about why it's important to be in community with other people and not rely solely on yourself to light yourself up. As a simple reminder, the results you get what you focus on is what you feel. Think about that for a minute.
mhm,
If you focus on an event, a negative event that has happened in your past, you immediately start feeling feelings associated with that event, right? So it's important that
mhm,
if you find yourself doing that, I think one of the best tools is to focus on what it is you're creating or why you're creating something. What's the direction you're going in to shift that state, shift that feeling, those emotions that are associated. But yeah, absolutely. Other people are a great way to support. For me, the biggest lesson in the entrepreneurial journey is when I first started my last podcast is a great example. When I first started podcasting, when I first started doing business, my only goal was to do all of that to make money. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting or having a desire to make money. You're in business to make money unless you're a nonprofit. And even then, they need money to continue to support their mission.
mhm,
I was focused only on how do I do something that's going to make me more money. So I
mm,
started a podcast because I wanted to make more money. And what I found was I didn't quite love it. I
mm,
sort of enjoyed it, but it wasn't lighting me up. It wasn't doing what I needed. It wasn't fulfilling me and my purpose, which is to connect with and inspire others. So I started recognizing over the last couple years and in my podcast in particular over the last few months, and that's where a lot of the shift for my podcast came from, was I would love for this podcast to help me create new clients, to help me reach new people and inspire others. But what I really want is to just be in love with and enjoy the process of creating this content, to have these kinds of conversations, which may be beneficial for others, but more importantly, they're things that I'm interested in. Why are you giggling?
Well, I'm giggling because it reminds me of Taylor Swift. I
Oh,
know our best, our amazing, our the person I love, and you're like, ugh, God, again. But it's so funny because we were just kind of talking about this the other day. So she's got some backlash on her new album, right? And somebody
yeah.
said, is she making content for her tween aged audience, or is she making the content for her? And so it kind of goes to podcasting, right? Are you making the content because your audience is already there and chanting and begging you to make it? Or are you making the audience, are you making the content, are you making the podcast because you really want to impact the world and bring out the message and use your voice
Mm-hmm.
for you?
Mm. Yeah, that highlights the two approaches, I think, the two main approaches to creating content, period,
Yeah.
podcast or otherwise, is you can create content that solves a problem, right? That's for a particular kind of person, a particular audience, if you will. So I could really easily create content specifically for coaches and
Hmm.
answer the questions that I know that they're asking me in these sessions. And I work with speakers and some others, but if I was going to look at my overall audience, so to speak, the clients that I work with tend to be coaches most
Right.
of the time. So I could create content that would potentially solve some of those challenges through a podcast, but I wasn't very excited about doing that. I kept running into roadblocks and
Mm.
I wasn't sure exactly why, but then I recognized it's because it wasn't about what I wanted, which is the other approach, is creating content for me that I'm sharing with the world.
Which in that case, then the attention behind it shifts,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
And I think again it goes back to why I created with the mastermind. I decided when I started this that I got so burned out after 24 episodes. I'm like, I'm calling this a season. And I took like 6 months off and then I started up again. And then I went from everything from every other week to once a month to twice in a week, to different seasons. And now I'm getting ready to start season 11. And it was like, I don't have a right or wrong answer. And that's the thing about podcasting that I think is so unique to other industries, quote unquote, because there is no answer. There is no standard. It's how you decide to make it work,
Hmm.
right? So then it
That's right.
goes into intentionality. If your intention is to only make money, which is what you just talked about a little bit
Yeah.
ago, then what else do you want to do to make money? Because
Right.
I feel like if the one thing that you want to do is to only make money, you're going to create havoc
Hmm.
really quick with your mental state. You're going to get burned out very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. It takes its toll, and the focus is important. Um,
Yeah.
and
But if
that's
you
why,
love what you do, I'm just going to
yeah.
butt right back in. If you love what you do and it shows and you keep showing up consistently, even if it is a season, right? And you're like, no, I'm just going to take this break because I need self-care and I need to refuel me and to be back, come back so I can be my best and energized.
Mhm.
I mean, Hollywood does it all the time.
Mhm.
Then there's something to be said for that. Then you're kind of like, okay, got it. So you're going to be on, like what I say, you're going to be fired up and excited to come back. And then your
Yeah,
intention is shifted because you're in a better place. You're focusing on how it makes you feel, right? And
that's.
how the work of it makes you feel.
I don't do a lot of work. You know this about me. I do enough work to publish this podcast, to edit it, which we had a slight hiccup, and I think there'll be some more editing required for this one. But generally speaking, I don't do a lot of editing. I still just kind of go with the flow and I publish what's there. And I'm able to enjoy the process as a result of not spending a lot of time in the weeds of the work
Mm-hmm.
and doing what I wanted to do. My intention was to create content that I enjoyed creating. Again, if that potentially leads to new connections or people reaching out to me to inquire about coaching, things along those lines, absolutely. That's all bonus. But
Yeah.
as long as I'm true to the intention and remember that when I might get a little frustrated or when things just aren't going my way, remembering why I'm doing it in the first place, it's for me. This is so that I can continue to build community, have conversations like this with other people, and ideally, someone out there is able to benefit from a conversation that I'm having. That's also a bonus, though.
Absolutely.
So, well, Shay, you've already shared with us your mastermind. What else are you working on? Anything you want to share with us?
Sure. I have speaking of sharing your voice even
Mm.
more, is a book project called Firestarters Book Project. And
Mm-hmm.
it is for creative thought leaders who want to come together inside a book and share a chapter. And we take care of all the back end stuff, all the editing and publishing. But it's about building that community inside a book. So
How are
it's
you
a
going to
little
fit all
bit
the people
different
in
than the
there?
mastermind. It's inside a book. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
So how are you going to fit all the people in there? I couldn't help it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love
And we're
that.
looking for co-authors. So if your listeners are interested, check us out at firestartersbookproject.com. And we would love to hear from you and love to connect with you and hear your ideas. The theme for this upcoming book is called How to Rekindle Your Kindness, What the World Needs Now. And it's just another layer of things I love to do. Leaving a legacy.
I was going to sing. I don't think people want to hear that on this podcast.
What
What the
leaving a
world
legacy?
needs now.
What the world needs now.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to bring someone else on who has a much better voice. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. Shay, thank you for sharing your time with me. As always, I enjoy our conversations and I look forward to seeing what we talk about next. We often, by the way, say that we should have been recording some conversations that we've had because we'll be traveling to a networking event or traveling to wherever event. And sometimes just sitting around listening to some live music, and we have these business related conversations that go way off the rails in a great way, right? Challenging and the real life of it all. And those are the conversations sometimes I wish we could share here that we have not. So I'm grateful we were able to coordinate for a recording. We've talked about it for a while. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And narrowing the divide is such a fantastic new uh new life. You breathe new life to this the podcasting world. So I am glad that you decided to come back to the dark side, as they say, right? As So I'm so glad that you graced us with your voice, and not just your physical voice, but your spiritual voice, your presence, because that's you are what part of what the world needs now.
Gosh, I so want to sing that song. It's not happening. All right. Well, until next time, if you would like to reach out, ask any questions of Shay via the podcast, you can visit podcast.danw.us and leave me a voicemail. You could sign up to receive notifications or updates about anything I'm working on or we're working on or the podcast is working on. Podcast doesn't do any work. Never mind. But you can reach out to me there. Or, like I said, if you're interested in the masterminds, I'll put the links in the show notes where you can email either of us and inquire directly about those or anything else that we've talked about today. Thank you so much, Shay. We'll see you soon.